happy Friday afternoon, everybody, and welcome to another MSP Cyber Roundtable. Today, we're welcoming Morgan Aspinall from Halo PSA. We've been really excited to have you on, so thanks for being here. We're going to be talking about security triaging with your PSA. We're also going to be covering CIS Control 13, I think, if I remember correctly.
Yeah, that's the one.
And we're midway through December. So we're fast approaching some holidays. It's starting to get cold outside, and it definitely feels like December. How are you guys so far?
Yeah, very well. Thanks for having me. It's also pretty cold here over in England. If we've got anyone watching, especially in the north of England, then yeah, you'll know what I'm talking about.
You're joining us after hours, man.
A little bit, yeah. It's not too late.
Do you think he's got a beer outside the camera frame?
Yeah. Sorry, I've just got to hop off real quick. Yeah.
This is Halo PSA at its best for everybody. After hours on a Friday in December, going out there and educating the MSP community. I mean, that's on brand for you guys.
That's when I do my best work. Yeah.
So we were talking a little bit about before about your journey before we jumped on live. You are not necessarily from the MSP segment, but you've learned with Halo PSA.
Yeah. There's very few people at Halo PSA. Really, it's sort of only our founder, Paul Hamilton, who's started the whole company up, that has direct MSP experience. I was part of the onboarding team, so I started off on support, and after a few months, joined the onboarding team. And while I don't have direct MSP experience, I've got hundreds of hours of talking through problems with MSPs. Yeah, well, yeah, exactly. I've got all this wealth of experience of talking with MSPs, talking about pain points, and I've got a hopefully a decent understanding of how they operate.
I'd love to throw one more question at you before we dive into some of our security stuff for today. You mentioned that Tim had MSP experience. He came from an MSP, but the majority of your team didn't come with that. And obviously, you guys are very well received in the market. So how do you perceive that as being beneficial to you guys over the time? How has it helped you guys be so successful? Because I think it is an interesting differentiator that just kind of came out in our first 15 minutes of chatting before we
yeah, definitely. Well, it wasn't actually Tim. So Tim Bowers, our CEO, a lot of people listening will probably have heard of him or spoken to him directly. It wasn't Tim that had direct MSP experience. It was Paul Hamilton, our founder. But yeah, like you say there, we don't have that direct experience. But what we were saying before the call was a lot of how an MSP works is, about driving great customer service, which is something that Halo PSA strives for as well. And in that regard, we're on exactly the same mission. And I think the community understand and appreciate how we're going about that. A lot of the Halo PSA team are very active on the community. So, Reddit, Tech Tribe, Discord, Slack, you'll find us all there. And if something comes up that we need to address, then we address it. And sometimes it's the response is more important than what prompted the response. And I think as long as we keep striving to provide that great customer service, then hopefully people will maintain on board.
Thanks for letting me put you on the spot, man. You had a
yeah.
A little impromptu interview there. Ooh. Matt, man, hi, how are you?
Well, before that, just so most of our viewers know, we don't script anything. So
we don't.
He really is on the hot seat sometimes. In any case, I'm doing okay today. It's a Friday. Sometimes you just want like 4 or 5 more days in the week, but it's okay. It's okay. Tomorrow I'll kick my feet up.
They're trying to put an NFL game in the middle of tomorrow. I couldn't believe I saw it. I know I'm the only one on this call that cares about that, but
I'm 100% sure you're not.
Well, at least
if you count all of our viewers.
Yeah, right. Awesome. Okay. So what's our control of the day? Let's
All right.
do
Let's jump
security stuff. Stop letting me
back
distract
into
everybody.
security land here. All
I
right.
didn't talk about food yet.
Well, here it is.
Morgan, what's your favorite pizza topping?
Oh, blimey. As long as it's meaty, then yeah, I'm on board.
All right, fair enough.
All right, meaty pizza toppings and network monitoring and defense, which is CIS Control 13, domain 13 of version 8. So the Center for Internet Security has 18 what they call critical security controls. Each of them have sub-controls. We are in Control 13, which is quite a doozy today because it has, for two reasons actually. First of all, it's got 11 subparts to it, 11 safeguards that you need to string together to achieve network monitoring defense under CIS controls. The second reason is, believe it or not, none of the requirements of this control are required for small business. Now,
I did not see that initially, but there it is.
So, and let me qualify it a little bit. I'm not talking about any small business. Let's talk about implementation groups. So in CIS, they have these 3 implementation groups, which is one of the things I love about this framework is how they baseline it for small, medium, large, anywhere from Main Street to Wall Street. So implementation group 1 is for small businesses that don't have any regulated data. Failures of security aren't going to kill people, right? And if there is sort of a data leakage, you're not stepping on any laws. You're not. It's not going to kill the business, right? It's more of an availability concern. Like if the computers were down, or if we lost some data, we couldn't recover it. That would be damaging to business. So if that's your small business, that they don't have to worry about confidentiality, and they don't have any custom business applications, and they're pretty small, they're going to be in implementation group 1. And if that's the case, they don't need to do this at all because this is a pretty advanced intervention. Now, there's still implementation groups 2 and 3. So implementation group 2 is for organizations that, they may have custom business applications. If they have regulated data, they are very small organizations. So they only have a little bit of regulated data. And certainly, while they may have confidentiality concerns, if an organization, if a security failure could impact human safety, right, then they're not IG2. So those organizations are not an IG2. And then IG3 is for the organizations that are the most security conscious. They need to stop the most attacks. They need to invest the most in security. And they probably have dedicated people earmarked towards some of these security tasks. But so in category 13, I'm just going to shoot through this really quick. This is about detecting or monitoring a network to detect when something's maybe not happening that should be happening, right? But also to protect the network, to stop that from happening to begin with. So you're going to see detective controls. You're going to see protective controls. The first one is to centralize security event alerting, which actually has a nice little link to today's topic around PSA integration. But this is separate from logging and log analysis because there's a whole separate control domain for that. What we're talking about here is if we've identified a thing that's bad and we've set up the log system to identify those bad things, right, or those things that we don't want to happen, where are those alerts going to go in real time? Because it's one thing to say review your logs every week or two, right? But sometimes you need a real-time alert of something happening right now. But we need to choose where that's going to go to. And in the case of a service provider, ideally this is going to go into a PSA, and we're going to do something about it in real time. We'll talk more about that in a few minutes, but let me shoot through the rest of the control domain here. 13.2, deploy a host-based intrusion detection solution. What that means, first of all, most people in the IT industry are familiar with the acronym IDS. This is what we're talking about here: intrusion detection solution, or intrusion detection system. It's some kind of detective system that lets you know when we think there's an intrusion in the network. It's a very generic term. These days, we're using terminology like threat hunting, somewhat substitutable with IDS, although the thing about threat hunting is it's a human doing it. An IDS system is automated, okay?
What would be the difference between a system and a solution?
Uh,
Or did I
I think the jargon has just mutated over time.
Okay.
I think it used to be system because you used to buy IDS like it used to literally be like a box, like a metal box you used to install someplace. And these days it's not always a metal box you install. Could be any number of things. But in any case, one of the things it said in 13.2 is host based, right? And what that means is it's software installed on a system, right? It's software installed on your operating system. Now the next one, similar, 13.3, deploy a network intrusion detection solution. Okay, sounds almost the same. The first one was host-based intrusion detection solution on operating systems, right?
Yeah.
The second one is a network intrusion detection solution. So that would be detecting it at the network layer.
Yeah.
It's not really one or the other. They work in concert because there's some things that are better detected inside a host, and there's some things that can't be detected inside a host. So we need both of those things.
I got a silly question, maybe. When packaging solutions, do these often come packaged together, or do different vendors specialize in one side or the other? Specifically.
It used to be the answer was no, but there's been a lot of consolidation in the industry, and so brands sort of collect both solutions these days. But I will say that from an MSP perspective, it's not common to package these things together because the network intrusion detection solution, that's like one each for a network, right? The host-based intrusion detection solution, that's one each for a device. So from a pricing and packaging perspective, the MSP has a little bit of a challenge there. One's a thing that can go into a per user or per device stack. Another thing has to be on a sort of like a per customer or per site stack. So they're not always sold together and they're not always purchased together, but oftentimes they're the same vendors.
Have you found one to be more popular than the other? I'm imagining host-based.
It used to be that the network-based stuff was more popular because it was, it was like selling firewalls, and people were familiar with selling firewalls. But I would say the host-based stuff is more popular these days. It's easier to deploy. It's faster to deploy.
Probably more actionable also.
I would argue it's probably better, faster, cheaper. So I think if you could only choose one, personally I would choose host-based. But there's going to be things you're going to miss with host-based. Like you're not going to see if someone plugs in a random device on the network, right? You're not going to detect a device where some kind of threat actor has disabled the local IDS, which is possible, right? If they disable the IDS agent, you're not going to get alerts from it, right? All right, I'm gonna leave IDS land. 13.4, perform traffic filtering between network segments. This means you've either got a firewall or some kind of layer 3 switch with ACLs between network segments. So you're separating. This is an old concept, right? Separate your management.
ACL in my world, you got to watch out for.
Okay, access control list.
Okay.
So network access control list or host access control list. But in any case, separating the traffic, what they mean by that is that you've got servers in one place, maybe you're like wired workstations in another place, printers in another place, phones in another place, the management plane that connects into management ports into another place, your guest Wi-Fi will be in another place, and none of those things can talk to each other. Or and this is not required by this control, but the even more advanced version of that is no device on the network can talk to any other device on the network, because we all live in the cloud these days, guys, right? And if all your stuff's in the cloud, then none of your stuff in your office needs to talk to any other stuff in your office. It only needs to talk to the cloud. And if you can get away with that, that is absolutely the best way to configure your switches, which is no damaging device on your network can talk to any other damaging device on your network. At the very least, you do that with your least trusted network segments, but I would argue it covers most of your things these days. Most of your office equipment is all cloud connected. 13.5, manage access control for remote assets. So what we're talking about here is who can access what from afar, right? Or what can access what from afar. I think that most people that are listening right now are pretty good at this kind of thing, but they don't always take the time to do it in detail. And I think it's worth noting here, if something doesn't need to talk to something else, it shouldn't be able to talk to something else, right? We need to get rid of flat networks. 13.6, collect network traffic flow logs. Almost every business grade device these days has a NetFlow feature. It's a standardized protocol which beams traffic in real time, or logs of traffic in real time. It's not the actual traffic. It's IP1 accessed IP2 on this port. It was this much data at this time, right?
That seems like it would be so much information.
It can be a lot of information, but typically it's not that granular. You know, it might only be like one data record for like a 5-minute period or something like that, or even an hour.
I see.
But collecting that into your log stream, that's what 13.6 is about. And a lot of you, I'm going to guess a lot of people, if not most people listening right now, have not really installed a NetFlow server and are not collecting NetFlow logs. It's incredibly cheap because almost all the things you guys buy has it enabled already. So turn it on, send the data someplace. Your forensic auditors will thank you if you ever need that.
So is that a complete log of all traffic?
It's not. It's the it's the internet equivalent of a pen register, which is what police agencies call like person one called person two, like the phone number, this phone number connected to that phone number at this time.
Yeah.
Right. That's what we're talking about on the network layer. Right.
Right.
And it really helps. Like if there's an incident and you're like, oh, I wonder if we lost any data, someone broke in, and then you look at the net flows and you're like, well, they only transferred a meg, so they probably didn't pull the whole company database, right?
I see.
But also, if you do find an incident where someone has breached your outer network security, they've gained access to one asset, right? You can provably say, well, they accessed this device and that device talked to this other device, but that device didn't talk to anything, right? And at that point, you'll know that the incident is contained, right? And you can essentially say, well, they've only accessed the data on this device and that device, and if there is no customer like confidential data on those two devices, then you could provably say, right, and this will hold up in court, that there was no breach, right? There was no data loss. So that's why this stuff's super important. Also, you can do some really cool real-time analytics, and you can even detect, if you plug this into like an Elastic Stack or something, you can even use machine learning to like ring a bell when, hey, there's some unusual traffic going on, right? So that's another great thing about that. 13.7, deploy a host-based intrusion prevention solution. Okay. So the difference between detection and prevention is a prevention system. And let me back up a little bit here, actually. Back to 13.6. 13.6 was the end of what's recommended for implementation group 2. So implementation group 3 is for the organizations with those highest security spends, highest criticality, right? So that's why these are two separate controls. And 13.7 is more expensive, but a prevention system, if it detects something bad or even something questionable, gates slam down, that device is isolated, right? Or shut off or frozen, right? And basically the idea is instead of being innocent until proven guilty, right? It's guilty until proven innocent on the network. And so if the prevention system kicks in, someone would have to then go in and say, oh, no, that's okay. Or no, that's not okay. Good thing the prevention system kicked in, right?
Are prevention systems fully automated, or is there ever people elements to them?
They can be configured in different ways. It's in best case scenarios, it's a combination of people and automation. and you have the ability to choose what's the default behavior. Do you want to default prevent until a human looks at it, and because maybe it'll like save 20 minutes or an hour, right?
Mm-hmm.
Or do you want it to be like, well, let's not have so many false positives. Let's have a human like look at this first, right? And you can go either way.
Interesting. Thanks.
But yeah, oftentimes it's packed with humans, and in a large organization, you'd own those humans. They'd work in your SOC, but in a small organization, you'd outsource that to a vendor like Arctic Wolf.
They got to change that word, man. They can't have all those humans in socks like that. These working conditions.
13.8, same thing, but for networks, right? The idea would be to literally kick something off the network if you don't like what you see, right? So that would be like you need to have something that has remote control over the actual network switching, right? Or the Wi-Fi access points that actually, either bans a MAC address or ideally shuts off a port. And then 13.9, port level access control. You sort of need that to do the network intrusion prevention. Port level access control, for anyone that's been in IT a long time, we're talking about 802.1x. On Wi-Fi, we might be talking about captive gateways or captive portals. The idea here is to get on the network, you need some piece of information that says you are you, or that device is authorized. So it usually involves a username and password in combination with something like cryptography. So a certificate. So a printer might be clear listed because it's dumb and it doesn't support 802.1x. But in that case, you'd segment that off to an untrusted network. Whereas, a laptop, that's highly sensitive, and the user would actually type in their username and password to get on the network. Or maybe they'd type in their username and password, but they would also have to have an encryption certificate, which says not only is that person allowed on the network, but that device has the cryptography to get on the network, right? It could also be combined with hygiene controls in the same way that people are sometimes putting in solutions like Cisco Duo that checks like whether your system's patched or your AV is running to access a VPN or a remote network. You can do the same thing with 802.1x and say, you know what, the password's right, the certificate's right, but you know what, you don't have all your patches. You're not coming on the network, right? Or your AV's not turned on.
Right? I guess that's why it's expensive.
That is why it's expensive. Yeah, you need all sorts of extra stuff and configuration to do that.
It's interesting that there's two layers here. There's the detection layer and the prevention layer. Why would you not want to have the prevention layer in place?
Frankly, the protection, like to do the automated prevention to stop the thing, is more expensive. It takes more people. Right. It takes more products.
So I'm going to take a stab, Matt, and the only reason I'm just because I want you to grade my work here. I think that in some organizations, the cost of the security is more than what is being secured. So if you've got an organization that, we talked about this. I came from the restaurant industry. There isn't a ton of data that's so valuable that you can afford to add X number of minutes to every delivery, right? Because then you just are shooting the business model in its foot. So some of those businesses have to take on extra risk, and that gets mitigated through either A, other controls, or B, through insurance or other mitigation methods. But I think that's probably my best possible stab at it.
That's right. Although I usually look at the cost of the risk, not to confuse it with the cost of the asset, right? Because there's all sorts of ways of evaluating risk. Like you might have $1 million building, right, that needs to be protected, but maybe there's not that many cyber things in the building, right? Maybe the worst possible thing is you damage a building to $20,000, right? In which case, there's not very much risk, and you certainly wouldn't want to spend more than $20,000 a year to prevent $20,000 in damage per year, right? Two more really quick, and then we'll be done with network monitoring and defense. So 13.10, perform application layer filtering. What we're talking about here are think of them like firewall products, right? So you can actually stick firewalls in front of web servers, and they will, instead of just only allowing web traffic through, only allow specific web calls through. And so a web application filter needs to understand the web application. It needs to know all the variable names. It needs to know about the certificate setup. It even might need to know data types or data fields. And like, are you allowed to put like XML into that field that usually only has integers or numbers in it, right? It takes a lot of configuration, frankly. And so while you can do that kind of thing with software, it is complex to set up and install. Another example are databases. There's others, and you can stick those same types of filtering systems in front of database servers. Only allow user A to access database table B. And I know that databases also have access controls, but what we're talking about here is an extra layer. Same thing on the web applications. The last thing on the list, 13.11, tune security event alerting thresholds. Now I know that it was actually 13. Was it 13.1? Was talking about setting up alerts, right?
Circle of life. Here we are again.
So there's this important thing to understand about alerting thresholds, and this is going to be our jumping off point to the next conversation, okay? Because and it's, let me just say, tuning the security event thresholds is difficult. So there's a bunch of studies out there that say that if, and I don't recall the exact math, but I remember it being striking. Something like if at least 1 out of 20 of your security alerts are false positives, vigilance gets reduced by half, right?
Oh.
So don't quote me on that number exactly, but when we're talking about security event thresholds, we want to be notified when there's an event, but we don't want to be notified too much, because if we get notified too much or at the wrong time, right, and we have these false positives, people will not have the vigilance required to respond quickly in case of an actual problem. And so figuring out the exact balance here is it's a complex exercise. And it's not just a matter of, oh, it's this type of application or that type of application, or it's a disk array versus that thing. It's custom to infrastructure. It's custom to the human element. It's custom to the application and the business environment. So this is very expensive to get right, but it's also critical to do in a high-performing security program.
So, forgive me. Go ahead.
Yep, that's it. That's 13. That's 13. That's CIS 13.
13.11 is like solve for Boy Who Cried Wolf, basically. Like that's how you can say it in simple terms. I like that a lot. We made it through 13 with nothing unlucky happening.
Yeah, so sorry, Morgan. Network monitoring defense had 2 pages today instead of 1. There's a lot of pieces to that. But now that we just talked about like all the ways that we're monitoring our networks to keep them safe, like what do we do when we find something bad has happened? I know that we're talking, and it like directly relates to today's title, right? Security triaging. The important word is that T word, right? With your PSA. So we've got these alerts. What should we be alerting on? Why should we be alerting? When should we be alerting? And what do we do about it?
That last point, you couldn't have tied it up nicer, because it's like you say, it's the perfect segue over to the PSA. So the first point and the last point are integral to triaging your security. And I guess it's difficult. Like, how does an MSP know, especially someone like a new MSP just starting up? How do you know where to set those thresholds? I suppose. I would probably say that I would start off by being oversensitive and reporting back on that data and seeing how many of these alerts that have come into the PSA are non-issues, and sort of work your way back from that. It's like similar to principle of least access. It's kind of principle of highest security threshold, and slowly work your way back from that until you have the alerts that are coming in are the actual alerts that you need to be actioning.
It's funny, when I started out my career, I came from an MSP world, and the way I thought about this kind of thing is when a bad thing happens, once you arrive at root cause, right? After you fix the thing, you go back to root cause and you say, well, how could we detect that thing in the future so that it doesn't happen next time?
Hmm.
And or that it's resolved quicker next time. And so I would create my playbooks using that methodology. But what that meant was that every problem would happen at least once, right? But then I went to
Yeah.
security school and they taught what you're saying, Morgan, right? Which is that actually you should be collecting everything and then you should be pairing back based on what you know is normal behavior, right?
Yeah.
So that you
Yeah.
can pick up anomalies of any type because there's unlimited types of anomalies. And so what you need to do is start with what's normal, right? And there's
Yeah.
automated ways to do this, but also, frankly, it's a lot of work, right? Figure out what's normal, and when things are not normal, right,
Yeah.
that's an alert. And
Yeah.
then, but it's hard, right? That's easy for me to say,
Yeah.
right? But how do we do this? We probably need to create metrics, sometimes compound metrics, right? Um,
Yeah.
I think like a really simple example of that, and this is like you can see my age because like I'm thinking of like back in the days when hard drives had sizes to them, but now we're in like this unlimited storage cloud. Um, but it used to be you had to watch disk utility like really closely, and
Mm.
when you reached whatever your threshold was, right? Was it when you cross? It depends on what type of machine and what the history was, but what type of behavior you're expecting. But when it hits like 60%, 80%, you need to do something, right?
Yeah.
Um, and so you'd have a metric on disk utility. Same thing for CPU and memory, right? But now, I mean, what are today's metrics that you're finding customers are focused on? It's probably not the ones I remember from 15 years ago.
Well, I'd like to preface this by saying I didn't go to security school, so I can only speak anecdotally. But I guess it's more around going back on one of those CIS points, application compliance, and making sure that everything's up to date, and if there's a patch that needs to be rolled out, it is rolled out. Nothing's falling behind. Like you say, we live in a cloud-based world these days, so monitoring things like disk utility, yeah, is not so much of a problem. But yeah, it's more application-based, I suppose.
Yeah, I know. I'm still dating myself here because I'm thinking about load balancers, but these days everything's like containerized or it's serverless, right? But
Mm,
monitoring how an application actually functions, the actual health, right? And
mm,
actually at sort of like the user level. We all see these status pages these days, right? So as an MSP, like monitoring that user experience and then knowing when something happens and then alerting on it. Um, you'll need to create a number of alerts there, right? To look for different types of things that your customers would be concerned with. Um,
yeah.
and then like what are the things inside the MSP? Because we should also probably be looking at the performance inside the MSP, like how long does it take to close out a ticket, right? Um,
Yeah. Yeah,
like
well, and it's interesting that you mentioned that. So, uh, Halo hosts the Suffolk Tech Tribe meetup. Obviously, PAX 8 hosts it as well. So thanks, PAX 8. But yeah, I often sort of sit down with MSPs and talk about all things MSP once a month. And this topic came up, and someone had an interesting response to it. And that's also another point there is making sure that you're doing the right hiring, right? We're not necessarily just talking about security from the standpoint of an application, but doing your criminal background checks on who you're employing. If we're talking about security inside of an MSP, there's a human element to it as well, and I found that really interesting. How we're fixated on networks and firewalls, but you might let someone in that brings malicious intent with them as a person. So there's I found that an interesting point.
all right, so should we go back to theory and I'll do like the 2 minutes of like what the security engineering book says on this stuff.
Let's do it.
But the first thing that they're going to tell you in any security theory environment is like, what are you securing? right? Are you securing devices? Are you securing like information? So first you need to understand that, right? And then you need to understand what you're securing it from, right? And there's the the basic measures of security is the data available when you need it, right? Does it remain confidential so only the people that are supposed to be authorized are able to access it? And are we sure that it maintains integrity? Are only the authorized people able to update that information? And these days there's a fourth sort of dimension of security, which is, and could any of those failures of any of those three things lead to an impact in human safety? Which these days, whether you're in construction or healthcare, or air traffic control, right?
Yeah.
Any of those things could lead to a human safety issue, right? Even in food, right? Or talking to people that are dealing with they're doing wastewater treatment, right? And they need to worry about this stuff. So I mean, it's everywhere, the potential impact to human safety, and you need to think about all those things, right? So when should we be concerned? Like, we need to go down to the assets themselves and look at, well, how do we know when that asset is safe, right? Well, we could look at NIST. I guess it's 6 functions now. I really love these, what's taken sort of the MSP industry by storm, the terminology like left of boom and right of boom, right? So we talk about the things that happen before the bad thing, and then the things that happen after the bad thing. So I think a lot of people think about like, oh, we definitely want to detect the bad thing, right? But actually, detecting the bad thing is usually too late. So like, if
Yeah.
you actually want to reduce the monetary impact of security problems,
Well, yeah, this
responding to
is
the
what I
bad
meant.
thing's not enough, right? Like,
Yeah, and this is what I meant about the detection versus prevention,
yep.
because if you're detecting it, it could already be too late at that point. So yeah, that's a tricky one to get around.
So one of the things that we work with PSAs on is we alert when we find a CVE rated vulnerability, particularly one that is likely to be circulating in the wild, right? So as an MSP, you can actually put alerts in place and say, you know what, my customer wasn't attacked, but some other MSP, their customer was attacked, right?
Mm.
And it happened this week. And because I have such and such software, I know that that vulnerability, which previously was below sort of like the cost threshold of dealing with, right, is now sort of like at a higher priority because we've got this shared intelligence in the world. And now that's a good time for that to become a ticket, right? And go out to a PSA system and probably go into a high urgency queue, right?
Hmm.
Um, and that's probably something that should be done in days, not months, right? Or
Yeah.
maybe that vulnerability was already in a queue, right? But it was in a low priority queue, and now it needs to go to a high priority queue, right? And that would probably be something that would be urgent versus something that's maybe not alertable, like a project plan of, hey, we're going to do these 10 things over 10 months, right?
Mhm.
Um, there's
Yeah.
other, yeah. Go ahead.
I was gonna, yeah, sort of expanding on that. It's also about the frequency in which these types of events occur. If all of a sudden you're getting flooded with these alerts, the chances are that there's a more serious underlying problem to manage. So yeah, it's about detecting anomalies, and if it's not an anomaly, then it should be disregarded, I suppose. But also detecting the frequency at which anomalies occur. And if a lot of anomalies happen at the same time, something bad is happening somewhere,
Yeah,
and that
yeah,
should be actioned.
absolutely. And I'm going back to the pre-smartphone era, but I remember like my old Nokia from 20 years ago, when that thing was rattling its way off the counter with vibration. It
Yeah,
was because I received like 200 text messages because like everything was down, right?
yeah,
Um,
yeah, yeah,
a once an hour is sort of like normalish, but if the phone was beeping like once a minute, I know that like, oh, all sorts of things are going haywire right
yeah,
now. Hosts are down. I'm not getting telemetry, whatever. Certainly, that also should be factored into security triaging, because maybe like one of those events would be a non-issue or a low issue, like someone, a random device in a random room and at a random customer went down because someone unplugged it or someone plugged in a vacuum cleaner or something, right? And it tripped a breaker. So what, right? But if all of a sudden we're seeing that, actually we're seeing this event across like 50% of systems at client side A, right? That's something that should then be alertable, right? And it should probably go into a high priority triage. And I think having these triage levels, with different urgency and different importance, that's really the difference between an MSP that can make money and an MSP that can't make money. If they're not effectively making the low priority stuff low priority, low urgency, right? What that means is everything's a fire, right? And when everything's a fire, not only do you perhaps use the wrong people for the wrong thing, or you're working long hours to do stuff that could have been done during hours, but when there's a bad thing, sometimes that bad thing's not getting handled, right? It's not getting handled until way too late.
And you touched on an interesting point there that I was going to ask you a question about. As perfect segue. You said there the wrong people doing the wrong thing, and I'm not quite sure how I feel about this. So I'll ask the experts. But about if you're large enough to have a security, if you've got a SOC, should you have people in that team that are experts in certain types of events, or is that being too granular, and should everyone be able to handle any type of alert that comes in?
With my security lenses on, that's what these are, guys. These are security glasses. With my security lenses on, I sort of see everything that happens in the technology team as being security related. And so I don't think of there being like security people and non-security people, right? But people do sometimes do things that have a higher impact to security or a lower impact to security, right? So when it comes to a vulnerability that got tripped, right? Actually, that doesn't necessarily need to go to a highly skilled engineer. A level 2 engineer can get a vulnerability report, and if they're trained up to deal with that, as long as they're good at answering the phone quickly or they're good at opening a ticket quickly, like that help desk person that knows how to go log into a device and just like click patch or click like uninstall software, actually that person would be great at that job. So, when I think of the right person doing the right thing, I'm not always thinking of, well, this is a unique technical problem, so clearly we need the smartest guy in the room. What I'm thinking of is the opposite of that. Well, this is a technical issue that someone can be trained to do specifically this thing, and once they're trained to do that, they don't need to know everything else. First of all, right? So you only need to train them to do that thing, and secondly, if they're just waiting for that thing, they can respond really quickly, right? Whereas your highest experience engineer, they might be on site at a client, like doing some big project, right? And you certainly don't want to be pulling them off your big money making project install, whatever, to deal with some alarm that tripped 15 minutes ago, right?
Yeah. And I suppose it's also important to make sure that even level 1, even those people triaging, have some rudimentary knowledge of how severe an alert might actually be, to make sure that it goes straight to level 2 if it needs to, or to level 3 if it's an urgent issue that needs to be resolved straight away. So not necessarily knowing the ins and outs of how to solve a problem, but having an understanding of how serious an impact a problem might have.
So it's the senior guy's job with the business owner of the MSP to figure out, okay, what class of problem needs to be dealt with by who, and what are the instructions for this class of problem, and to create those classes and to create those categories of alerts, right? And that's how you can effectively triage.
Yeah. And then over time, I imagine it's going to be AI taking over that role and doing that triaging.
People keep asking me that. I think there's always room for AI to make human jobs more repeatable or faster, but specifically security alerting. I don't see any time in the foreseeable future where humans don't need to be at the center of this. I think, even if your attacker is AI, right?
Yeah.
you're not going to stick an AI, in as a sole defender, right?
Sure.
You need people, right, to outsmart the AI, because until we end up with AI that's smarter than people, which AI is good at a lot of stuff, right? But it's not generally smarter than people, right? Until that time happens, we are always going to need people to be smarter than the AI.
Yeah. Yeah. Interesting.
But when you're in a PSA and you've seen like a similar looking event like 100 times before, by all means, like AI can classify that and say to a human, "Hey, we've seen these other 100 events that look sort of like this one. Should we do the same thing again?"
That's exactly what I was thinking. AI, like you say, it's not smarter than a human, but it is very good at pattern recognition and understanding the different how data can be manipulated, and you don't necessarily need a person to be there triaging for that.
I heard a rumor that Halo is working on some new AI concepts here. Is there anything you can share?
Yeah, we've already. Well, yeah. Funny you mentioned that. We've already got this concept in place. It uses something called embeddings, which basically allows for two tickets to be compared in terms of the contextual similarity of them, which is exactly what we're talking about here. And obviously that goes both ways. It compares the contextual similarity, which means that it can also compare an anomaly in that list, something that's not contextually similar to the rest of the set. So I'm not sure how soon or long it will be before AI performs the remediation thereof, but I think already in Halo you'd be able to triage those security alerts accordingly.
I think we're closing in on the end of the hour here. So, as we think about alerts and metrics and triaging and service tickets, and it might be worth sort of transitioning over to, okay, let's talk about the actual PSA. So you work at a PSA company. You've got lots of features built in. Is there anything you want to showcase or highlight as being particularly interesting or new in your world?
I don't think 10 minutes is enough time, really. I mean, I can
choose one.
Maybe we can talk about the AI in a bit more detail, I suppose, and have a look at some examples there. This isn't prepared, so let me.
That's the best kind.
Let me spin up a trial. Yeah. So let's see if I can share my screen.
You should be able to, and I'll click the.
So
I'll pull the video feed in.
Cool. There we go. Can I share my screen?
Yeah, you should be able to add a camera or add a present, and
I'm trying to select the tab, but it's not doing it.
Oh, there it is.
How about that? Cool. Yeah, not scripted, so I guess we'll start off by getting a new trial of Halo PSA. So there's for the people listening that are interested in Halo PSA, you don't have to have a demo. We're very open and transparent as a company, and part of that means if you're interested in taking a look at Halo PSA, you can go to halopsa.com. There's a big start trial button in the top right. Plug in a couple of details.
Zach, I'm a little jealous. I think this is faster than we do it.
It's pretty quick. Yeah, and like I say, obviously sales can reach out and they can provide a demo if you want, but this is from the website, so there's nothing locked away here. You don't need to schedule a demo of anyone. And yeah, I suppose as it's a hot topic at the minute, AI. So we'll take a quick look at some of the things that we've got in the trial configuration as of today. And we're making use of some of the functionality that OpenAI provides to return this information. So yeah, let's log a ticket, but let's log a ticket as the end user, as the MSP's customer. And what I'll do is I'll click my agent account in the top right and then switch over to the end user portal. Now, one of the nice things, one of the great things about Halo PSA, or one of the great things about Halo in general is it's only one product that we sell. Included in that license fee that you would pay is the entire product. So nothing's locked away. You don't have to pay for an integration or anything like that. The entire feature set is available to you. And Halo as a product is diverse enough to actually fulfill the needs of quite different markets. And we've got three sort of three child companies, let's call them, all using the same code base, the same product. So we've got Halo PSA targeted for MSPs. We also have Halo ITSM that is targeted more for the enterprise market, and then Halo CRM that is for B2C type setups. Now, what that means is simply by virtue of the fact that we have different markets and those different markets have different needs, Halo PSA has an enterprise grade self-service portal right out of the box. So we've sort of inherited that from the ITSM side, and we're very fortunate to have it. So what we're looking at here is the self-service portal, where we can configure the menu options that we have here. We can also see the status of cloud services, and we can provide updates on those. So you were saying earlier about these status pages. We can actually put a status page directly on the Halo self-service portal, just down here. So let's go ahead and log a ticket.
We're only seeing the PSA dashboard right now, but
oh, sorry.
It's okay. Put the ticket in fast, and then we'll see it, right?
Okay. Yes. Yeah. Cool. Sorry. Yeah. All of that was completely meaningless. So what you were looking at was not the self-service portal. Ignore me. But yeah, let's log a ticket real quick. And so yeah, you're probably looking at this, where what we're looking at here is just a dashboard of information, touching on the security theme, and something that I've heard MSPs mention before is the importance of presenting the security metrics back to the customer to ensure that their customers know that what they're paying for, it's not just a line on an invoice, right? We're actually preventing these issues. We have fixed these problems last month. And so the best way to do that in Halo is to create a dashboard of information that's pulling from the system. So Halo sits on top of a SQL database. The reporting capabilities are just a read-only window into that database. So the reporting in Halo PSA is limited only by one's knowledge of SQL. And these reports can be internal, so you can just return them to the team, or you can return this information back to the customer. So maybe something to people to take away is how overt are you as an MSP presenting your security remediation back to your customers? How aware are they of the problems that you're fixing behind the scenes? Because it's all part of displaying the MSP's value to their customers in like a QBR or something like that. So let's see if our ticket has come in. Cool. So what we're looking at here is the service desk dashboard, and we mentioned a couple of times there about sort of appropriately triaging and making sure that your priorities and your SLAs are set accordingly, and your lists are sorted and filtered appropriately. That's all configurable in Halo as well. we can create custom lists on the left-hand side here. So here's a few that we've already got in place. Things like major incidents, things like open problems. We can include P1 alerts in here as well. And we can see, based on the list that we select on the left-hand side, we actually have the list of tickets presented to us. The tickets themselves can be sorted based on our column profile, which we can get to from the three dots in the top right, where we can edit our column profile, and we can set our sorting in here. So it might be that we want to sort by our SLA time remaining, which in turn is determined by the priority that we set during triage. So yeah, we've got up to 5 levels of sorting there. And yeah, in terms of some of the things that we have been working on the AI front, so currently that's all presented on this AI Insights tab in a ticket. So the ticket I logged was, how do I create a shared calendar in Outlook? And what we can see in our AI Insights tab is a couple of options at the top. So that was a fairly quick ticket just to save time, but you'll probably find in reality people provide quite verbose emails where you actually just need to pick out the core bits of information. So we've got that here in our generated summary. We've also got our ticket type, priority, and sort of customer tonality based on the incoming message. And then down here at the bottom, we've actually got a suggested resolution to the ticket in question. And this is using the new embedding stuff that I mentioned earlier. So when a ticket is logged, we're doing a contextual search for other similar tickets in the system. If we find a ticket that is contextually similar enough, we then pull the resolution from that ticket and return that back onto the new ticket that's been logged. And not only is it here on our separate tab, but when we go to resolve our ticket, we can see that suggested resolution up top here.
So Morgan, are we getting these suggestions because the user asked the same question last week, or a user at a different customer asked the same question last week? Or are we actually going to get suggestions from like, hey, there's another MSP that solved this really difficult challenge, and I don't need to go like searching around on Google?
It's a great question. It's something that I've started working with a couple of MSPs that use Halo to start to build a repository of those kind of common MSP tickets out. And then I suppose there's plans next year to have a community repository of shared knowledge that we can then plug into Halo PSA. And this response will not only be from your own tickets, which it currently is, but also from tickets that other MSPs provide.
Well, that's exciting. It sounds like it's not only something that might save time, but it might even help support training or support people that are really in learning mode in the engineering workforce. So
for sure,
that's exciting.
Sure. Yeah, and I know we've kind of come to the end of the podcast there, so I guess I'll leave it at that.
So, well, thanks for joining us, Morgan. I'm glad we got to talk about alerting and stuff with Halo. I think that it's worth noting there's a lot of different ways you can use a PSA. So maybe we'll have you back to talk about
for sure,
sales workflows, prospecting. My favorites, of course, account reviews, right, with customers, making sure that they're in alignment with what you're delivering.
Yeah.
Zach, you got any questions for this guy before we let him go? Probably a lot.
I don't. Yeah, I do.
Okay.
I do have a bunch. Yeah.
Zach, I've got one question for
Please.
you. What's your favorite pizza topping?
Pepperoni, bacon, extra cheese.
That sounds like more than one topping.
Yeah, that's a whole meal.
All right. Well, it was great to have you, Morgan. Great conversation. Thanks for coming. Everybody, we're going to have Brian Gillette next week talking about the spirit of the first 5 followers. He is going to be telling his own journey of having success in the startup space. And it's a great tale for you to apply as an MSP to your own business. So thanks for joining us here on this Friday afternoon. Morgan, thanks for giving us the after 5 treatment. We really appreciate you you joining us. It was awesome. And
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, man. Make sure you guys join us next week. Thanks, everybody.
Thanks, guys.
Bye.
Bye.